Go back to food stamp. JD Vance's words cracked through the U.S. Capitol like a rifle shot, splintering the air inside a packed hearing. In 47 breathless seconds, 20 million Americans watched Jasmine Crockett rise, eyes blazing, as a mother in the gallery clutched a torn American flag to her chest. What could she possibly say next that would turn a public humiliation into the moment America would never forget? Hours earlier, Washington, D.C. was already tense. Rain slicked the marble steps of the Capitol, the flag snapping like a warning in the wind. Inside, crews tested microphones. Cameras blinked red, and every seat waited for the clash no one knew would explode. And inside, crews were setting up microphones, testing cameras, every lens ready to broadcast what was about to unfold to millions of living rooms across the country. Surely, this wasn't just another congressional hearing. It was the spark for a fight over disaster relief that could keep the lights on, rebuild homes, and put food back on empty tables. By the end of the day, it would become something bigger, a test of what America owes her own people. Everyone in the chamber knew the stakes. Everyone knew tempers could boil over. Jasmine Crockett walked in through the east entrance, coat collar turned up against the wind. And when you're young, sharp, and ready for battle, she carried something no one else in that room could see. The memory of a little girl standing in a grocery line, watching her mother quietly pay with food stamps so her kids wouldn't go to bed hungry. That memory wasn't a burden. It was her fuel. Across town, JD Vance stepped out of a black SUV, his half-smile calm but calculated. He had built a reputation on hardline welfare talk and didn't come here to make friends. In his mind, this was about principle. In hers, it was about people. Two worlds were about to collide, one built on compassion, the other on contempt. And today they would crash in front of the entire nation. But what happens when compassion meets contempt? Live before the whole country. The corridors of the Capitol were already alive. Lawmakers filed in, some clutching thick folders, others whispering in tight circles. Reporters lined the hallways, camera crews staking their ground, every lens hungry for a headline. The buzz in the air felt charged, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Among the crowd in the public gallery was Gloria Miller, a 58-year-old mother who had driven all night from West Virginia. In her hands, she held a folded American flag, faded, frayed at the edges, the one her late husband, a veteran, had brought home from his final tour. She didn't come for spectacle. She came to make sure that flag still meant something. Miles away, in a shelter tucked under an overpass, Eddie Morales sat hunched over a borrowed phone. Once a proud Marine, now sleeping on a cot with 20 other men, he knew the relief package on the table could be his ticket back to dignity. He had the live stream link open, the volume low, waiting for Jasmine Crockett to take the floor. A young reporter brushed past the crowd, muttering into her phone, "Today's hearing might get ugly." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Somewhere in the building, a gavel would soon fall, and the first blow would be struck, not with fists, but with words sharp enough to draw blood. Will today be remembered as a fight for aid, or a political bloodbath? The heavy doors to the hearing room swung open, and Jasmine Crockett stepped inside. She moved with measured confidence, shaking a few hands along the front row, her smile warm but her eyes locked with purpose. Every step echoed against the marble floor, a reminder that this was not just another day in Congress. It was a battlefield. Across the room, JD Vance leaned back in his chair, watching her like a hawk sizing up its prey. He leaned toward a Republican ally, muttered something under his breath, and the two shared a brief smirk. For Emerty, it wasn't just political opposition, it was personal, and Jasmine could feel it in the way his gaze lingered. The chairman called for order. The chatter in the gallery faded to a hush as the red light on the TV cameras flared on. In that instant, millions of eyes across America were fixed on this room, on these two faces, waiting for the clash they didn't even know was coming. Jasmine adjusted the microphone, her hands steady, her voice low but clear. "This," she began, sweeping her gaze across the chamber, "is about keeping America's promise." The words hung in the air, cutting through the stillness like a bell in a quiet church. Somewhere in the back, Gloria's grip tightened on her folded flag. But how long can a promise survive in the crossfire? Jasmine leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made the room lean in. She spoke of towns where factory gates were padlocked, of fathers who'd packed their last lunch for work only to be told to go home for good. She laid out the numbers. 3 million jobs lost in 5 years, hundreds of communities hanging by a thread. And she called the relief bill a lifeline, not a handout. Every figure was a gut punch, but she delivered them like someone who'd carried the weight herself. The camera panned to Gloria in the gallery. Every time Jasmine hit a point, Gloria gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if she'd lived every word. Her hands never left the folded flag in her lap, the fabric worn soft from years of holding on to it. That flag had seen combat zones, homecomings, and funerals. And now it was here, in the middle of a political battle over what America owes its own people. Reporters scribbled in their notepads, their eyes darting between Jasmine and the row of senators opposite her. Across the aisle, JD Vance sat slightly sideways in his chair. His pen clicked in a steady rhythm, a tell for those who knew him. He was waiting for the moment to break her momentum. His eyes followed her like a predator tracking the shift of prey, measuring, timing, almost daring her to make a move he could pounce on. Jasmine didn't flinch. She reminded the chamber that the people they served weren't asking for favors. They were asking for the country to keep its word. Her tone sharpened just enough to make the point, but never crossed into anger. For now, she owned the room. But does truth stand a chance against a sharpened insult? She was just finishing her last sentence when a sharp click cut through the silence. JD Vance leaned forward, pressed the microphone button, and without missing a beat, dropped the words like a hammer. Go back to food stamp. People like you always want handouts. His voice didn't rise, but the contempt in it was enough to slice through the room. A ripple of reaction swept the chamber. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others let out a low, knowing chuckle. From the gallery came the faint sound of someone sucking in a sharp breath. The cameras caught every flicker, every twitch, broadcasting it live to millions. The lens found Gloria. Her eyes were wide, the color drained from her face. She pulled the folded, frayed flag tight against her chest, as if shielding it from the insult. That flag had been through war. She'd never thought she'd need to protect it here, in her own capital. Jasmine froze for just a heartbeat. The words had landed, but they hadn't broken her. She stepped toward the mic, closing the space between her and the man who'd just tried to reduce her to a stereotype. Her voice came low, deliberate. My mother used food stamps to keep me alive when factories closed. It wasn't charity. It was America keeping its promise. The room went still. Even the hum of the light seemed to fade. Her words echoed through the speakers, spilling into living rooms, diners, shelters, anywhere someone was watching. And in that moment, it wasn't politics. It was personal. Can dignity ever be silenced? Hundreds of miles away, in a dimly lit shelter beneath a concrete overpass, Eddie Morales sat hunched over a battered phone. The live stream was grainy, the sound tinny, but Jasmine's words had cut through crystal clear. He glanced at the other men on their cots, some half listening, some staring into the floor. She's fighting for us, he said quietly, and for the first time in months, a few heads lifted. Online, the moment had already exploded. A 15-second clip, Vance's insult followed by Jasmine's comeback, was being reposted faster than reporters could type their headlines. Hashtags blazed across timelines, captions split between outrage and pride, and in kitchens, on construction sites, in teachers' lounges, people were watching, rewinding, and watching again. Back in the chamber, Vance leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. To him, this was just politics, a skirmish in a longer war. He clicked his pen twice, scanned the faces around him, and seemed satisfied that the exchange was over. But in the gallery, Gloria's grip on the folded flag tightened until her knuckles whitened. Something in her chest shifted, a mix of anger, pride, and the raw memory of a husband who'd fought for a country that now seemed at war with itself. She didn't have a microphone, but she had a voice, and she could feel it building. If one voice can shake a room, can it shake a nation? The murmurs in the chamber hadn't even died down when Vance leaned forward again, pressing his mic with deliberate calm. This country can't save everyone who refuses to work, he said, his tone smooth but dripping with judgment. The words landed like cold steel, slicing through whatever warmth Jasmine's last statement had brought. Across the dais, a few conservative senators gave small, approving nods. One leaned back, arms crossed, wearing the satisfied look of a man watching his side score a point. The tension in the room tightened, like a rope pulled one notch closer to snapping. Jasmine didn't blink. She straightened her back, eyes locked on Vance, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a flinch. Her voice came measured, each word carrying the weight of lived battles, stacking one atop another until they formed an unbreakable wall. She told them about the day her hometown's largest employer shut its doors, leaving hundreds of families, hard-working, tax-paying Americans, jobless overnight. She painted a picture of neighbors pulling groceries, of mothers taking second shifts, of fathers standing in unemployment lines still wearing their work boots. Her words pulled the air out of the room. "We didn't stop working," she said firmly. "We fought to get back on our feet, and America gave us a hand, not because we were weak, but because we were worth saving." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the cameras. In the gallery, Gloria's eyes sharpened, her grip on the flag shifting from protection to defiance, the fabric trembling under her fingers. When attacked, will her story hold the line? The chamber was holding its breath when it happened. Gloria Miller, who had been seated quietly in the gallery since morning, suddenly rose to her feet. In her hands, the faded frayed flag trembled, not from the wind, but from the force of her grip. "This flag fed my children when no one else would," she shouted, her voice cracking but fierce. Gasps rippled through the room as heads turned and cameras swung to capture her. For a moment, it wasn't politics anymore. It was raw truth spilling into the heart of power. The chairman's gavel slammed down. "Order! Order in the chamber!" He barked, but his voice was already drowned by a few scattered claps from the gallery. One clap turned into two, then three, until the sound began to grow. The air was shifting. The camera cut to Jasmine. Her eyes shimmered, but there was no sign of breaking, only steel beneath the glass. She stepped forward, her voice steady enough to cut through the noise without raising it. "And that is why we fight, so no American mother has to beg to keep her children alive." She didn't raise her voice. She let the silence lean in, her tone pressing so heavily that even the marble columns seemed to listen. Up in the gallery, Gloria's chest rose and fell. The flag now clutched like a battle standard, her knuckles white but unshaking. Somewhere behind her, a woman whispered, "She's right." The room seemed to freeze, as if waiting for someone to take the next step. Could this moment ignite a movement? By the time the gavel came down again, the live stream had already blown past 3 million viewers. Phones lit up in diners, offices, and school hallways as people tuned in to see what was happening inside the Capitol. Every few seconds, the viewer count ticked higher, proof that the moment had broken free of the room. On television, news networks cut the feed into a split screen. One side showed the chamber, Gloria still standing with the flag in her hands. The other flashed to a shelter where Eddie Morales sat glued to a small TV, surrounded by men who had stopped mid-conversation to listen. In another frame, a mother in a cramped kitchen stirred a pot of soup, eyes locked on the screen mounted above her fridge. Social media was on fire. Clips of Vance's insult and Jasmine's reply played on a loop, spliced with slow-motion shots of Gloria's outburst. Hashtags trended, threads filled with personal stories. People talking about the day they lost their jobs, the night their fridge went empty, the time a food stamp card kept their children fed. For some, it was solidarity. For others, it was a fresh battle line. Inside the chamber, Jasmine sat back in her chair, calm on the outside but feeling the weight of what had just unfolded. Across from her, Vance scrolled through his phone, a faint smirk hinting he wasn't done. The room still buzzed, but the fight had spilled far beyond these walls. In living rooms, shelters, and break rooms across America, the question was the same. What happens next? Is the tide turning in her favor, or is the backlash coming? The buzz in the chamber hadn't settled when Vance leaned into his microphone. His tone was casual, almost bored, but the words were aimed like a dart. "Congresswoman Crockett is just playing the victim card," he said, pausing long enough for the sting to land. A few of his allies chuckled under their breath, but not everyone on his side looked comfortable. One senator shifted in his seat, another shook his head as if Vance had gone one step too far. Even in politics, there are lines, and he was skirting the edge. Jasmine didn't answer right away. She sat perfectly still, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. Her eyes drifted up to the gallery, finding Gloria still clutching the faded flag, her shoulders squared, like she was holding the room together by sheer will. The cameras caught that moment. No talking points, no rehearsed lines, just two women connected by something bigger than the fight unfolding in front of them. Outside the building, millions watched, waiting for Jasmine to fire back. Inside, you could feel the tension stretch thin enough to snap. Vance leaned back, smirking as if the silence was proof he'd won. But Jasmine's stillness wasn't surrender. It was strategy. When she spoke, the room would know she had chosen her moment. When accused of weakness, how do you show true strength? The silence in the chamber was thick enough to hear the hum of the lights. Jasmine pushed back her chair and stood, the movement slow but certain. All eyes followed as she stepped down from the dais, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She walked toward the gallery, stopping in front of Gloria. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No words, just the quiet understanding of two women who knew what it meant to fight for something bigger than themselves. Gloria's hands shook as she extended the faded flag, and Jasmine took it with both hands, holding it like it was made of glass. When she returned to the podium, she didn't look at Vance or the senators. She looked into the cameras, into the millions of homes watching. "This flag is not just for the wealthy or the powerful," she began, her voice carrying without strain. "It belongs to every child, every soldier, every mother who refused to give up." The cameras moved in slow, deliberate pans, catching the details. A journalist lowering his pen, a staffer blinking back tears, even one of Jasmine's political opponents glancing down at the desk, unable to meet her. Pretty gaze. The room wasn't breathing, it was listening. In that instant, the flag wasn't just fabric. It was a reminder, a promise, and a challenge to live up to both. Jasmine's hands didn't tremble as she gripped it, but the weight of history was there, plain for everyone to see. Can a symbol heal a wound this deep? Jasmine stood at the podium, the flag still in her hands. She took a slow breath, then placed her right hand over her heart. Her voice was calm, but carried the kind of weight that could still a crowd. "It wasn't charity," she said, each word deliberate. "It was America, and America never turns its back on her own." The sentence landed like a gavel, not in sound, but in finality, sealing the moment in the minds of everyone who heard it. The room erupted. One by one, senators, staffers, and members of the public rose to their feet. The applause started as a swell and built into a roar that filled the chamber, echoing off marble walls. Up in the gallery, Gloria's face broke into a trembling smile as she stepped forward to embrace Jasmine. Miles away in the shelter, Eddie Morales rose from his cot and pressed his hand to his chest. Around him, men who had been silent for months nodded quietly, eyes fixed on the small TV. On social media, the hashtag America Keeps Its Promise exploded across timelines, climbing into the top trend within minutes. The cameras caught it all: the embrace, the applause, the rare unity in a room built for division. For a brief moment, politics felt secondary to something far older and deeper: the belief that a nation is defined by how it treats its own. Will America remember this moment or repeat its mistakes? By nightfall, the moment had gone everywhere. Every major network led with the same footage: JD Vance's cutting remark, Jasmine's unflinching reply, and Gloria rising with the torn flag. The clip played on a loop, anchors speaking over slow-motion shots as dramatic music swelled under their voices. In living rooms across America, people who'd never heard Jasmine Crockett's name were now calling her a fighter. News crews hit the streets, interviewing men and women in their 50s and 60s, people who'd lived through layoffs, recessions, and wars. More than once, a voice broke mid-sentence, eyes welling with tears as they recalled the words, "It wasn't charity, it was America keeping its promise." The reaction wasn't all applause. Pundits on certain channels accused her of grandstanding, calling the moment political theater. But in diners, union halls, and church basements, the conversation was different. They weren't talking about politics. They were talking about dignity. Vance, meanwhile, avoided the cameras entirely. He slipped out of the Capitol through a side exit, a small knot of aides shielding him from the reporters who shouted questions down the hallway. Not a single answer came, just the quick thud of footsteps fading into the night. Outside, the city buzzed with the story, every headline a variation of the same question. Had this hearing changed the game? And as the footage kept rolling, the image of Jasmine and Gloria standing together began to take root in the public's mind, not just as a moment, but as a symbol. Is this the beginning of his political decline? Within days, community groups from coast to coast were rallying under the same banner. America keeps its promise. Church halls filled with volunteers. Union leaders pledged their support. In small towns and big cities alike, people printed the slogan on banners, bumper stickers, and T-shirts. Jasmine's office overflowed with mail. Letters came from steel workers in Pennsylvania, from teachers in Texas, from retired veterans in Florida. Some were from people who had never supported her before, but who now admitted, sometimes reluctantly, that she had spoken a truth they could not ignore. In a shelter 2 states away, Eddie Morales packed up the few belongings he had. A local employer who'd seen his interview on the evening news had offered him a job. No questions asked. For the first time in years, Eddie left the shelter not as a statistic, but as a man with somewhere to go. And then there was Gloria. Her photograph standing in the gallery with the faded flag was everywhere. It became the unofficial emblem of the movement, a reminder that patriotism is not the sole property of the powerful. Airy, when she spoke at rallies, her voice carried the same conviction it had in the Capitol. Steady, unpolished, and impossible to forget. The hearing had ended, but its echoes were growing louder by the day. In living rooms, in workplaces, and in the quiet spaces between, people began to ask themselves what kind of country they wanted to be. Can one hearing rewrite a nation's heart? The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and deep crimson. Jasmine stood alone on the Capitol steps, the wind catching the flag above her and snapping it against the evening air. The crowds were gone, the noise had faded, but the weight of the day still clung to her shoulders. She looked up at the dome, its white stone glowing in the last light. For a moment, she let herself feel everything: pride, exhaustion, and the quiet ache of knowing the fight was far from over. Her breath came slow, each inhale carrying the scent of rain and marble. Somewhere, a camera crew lingered, lenses trained on her silhouette. Horn. The narrator's voice rolled over the scene, low and steady. In a room built for laws, she reminded them of promises. And in a nation divided, she found a way to unite the broken pieces. Jasmine's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the last sliver of sun dipped below the skyline. She didn't wave, didn't pose. She simply stood, her hands at her sides as if rooted in place by the weight of every story she now carried. The screen began to fade, the Capitol bathed in shadow. White letters appeared against the black. Share this if you believe America should keep its promise. The words hung there for a beat, daring the viewer to decide. If this was your family's flag, would you let it fall? There are moments that make an entire nation stop and look inward, like when a weathered, tattered flag becomes a symbol of a promise that must never be forgotten. Compassion and steadfastness can stand unshaken, even in the face of the harshest contempt, and a nation's honor is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable. When you see a promise being abandoned, will you walk past in silence, or be the one who stands up to remind the world it still matters? If this moment stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Like, share, and subscribe to First Shock. Where promises are kept and voices can't be silenced, tap the bell, because the next stand might be yours. Which moment hit you hardest? The insult, the comeback, or the flag? Tell us in the comments, and let your voice join the ones refusing to back down. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching.